So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure and an honor to have all of you here with Vartan Gregorian tonight. As some of you may know, and as you will find out from the pamphlet that's in your chair, we are celebrating the 15th anniversary of the Central Library, this magnificent structure, Temple of Knowledge. And in particular, we're celebrating the 17th anniversary of the speech that kicked this all off, Libraries as Acts of Civic Renewal by Vartan Gregorian, who came to Kansas City at the behest of my cousin, Jonathan Kemper, the president of our board, to help inspire us to do this, which it in fact did. So this is a celebration of the library and a celebration of Vartan Gregorian and what he's done for libraries and education and letters and learning in the United States and the world. But we do want you to know also that reprinted from his autobiography and from the first day he taught at the University of Texas, we have Gregorian's Rules for Students. And tonight you are his students. And as you can see, you don't eat in the classroom or chew because you might hypnotize him with the rhythm of your chewing. Please, no one read the newspaper during this lecture, this conversation. It's rude, but if you do, interrupt us to let us know the important news. If there's anything new about the Mueller report, we'd like to all hear it, right? And if you leave early, please sit near the door in order not to cause a commotion. Otherwise, we'll think that you're leaving under protest. So anyway, as you could tell, he has a sense of humor, in addition to being a man of great learning. I want to explain that we have two parts to tonight. I'm going to have a conversation with Professor Gregorian, Dr. Gregorian, and then we're going to bring a Kansas City resident up, his son Vahe, who, as some of you will know, is the award-winning sports writer for the Kansas City Star, and we'll talk about sports writing as a liberal art. Now you laugh, but we'll see. Now I do want to start off with another Kansas City connection of Vartan's, and that is Calvin Trillin, Bud Trillin, who was very involved with the New York Public Library when you were the director, the president of the New York Public Library. And on his farewell ceremony, when he was leaving to go to be the president of Brown University, every career has a step down, and leaving the library to go to Brown was that. But in any case, he delivered an ode, actually called it the Gregorian Saga, at the dinner that the trustees held to say farewell to him. So this is Calvin Trillin, and I'm just going to read you a little part of it to give you the flavor of what Vartan Gregorian accomplished at the New York Public Library. In Gotham, at the great repository of knowledge that's the center of this story, truth seekers went out to find what they were seeking. They found instead the roof above them leaking. They found collections crumbled, tables pitted. They found on Thursday they were not admitted. In reading rooms, they found such sad decay at one point even flashers stayed away. The place they loved was at the point at which they quickly must anoint a savior who could save the joint. They listed all the attributes they sought in this, the second savior God had wrought. It should be one whose high-toned speech was free of simple words such as a and thee, and one who had no tiresome aversion to speaking Greek or maybe even Persian. And not to judge one on appearance solely, it might be nice if he were roly-poly. And most of all, they prayed down on their knees for someone with a granny from Tabriz. Which leads me to my first question, Vartan Gregorian. This is your life. So here we are, 17 years after your speech, and we have this lesson from Calvin Trillin. You've had an extraordinary career, both before and after being here. We won't take credit for it, though. You've been the provost at Penn. I mean, your whole early career, I'm eliding, but provost at Penn, president of the New York Public Library, and the president of Brown University. And for 22 years, you've been the president of the Carnegie Corporation. But you grew up in a house in Tabriz, in Armenia, in Iran, with only 2 books in the house, as you describe in your autobiography. So how did this boy with only 2 books and his granny from Tabriz get here?
Well, the 2 books were, one was the Bible, and second one was a high school, English high school history, general history book with pictures. I'd never seen pictures in my life till I saw the book, because my father was graduate of American Memorial High School in Tabriz, Iran, where missionaries were there, and he had left his 2 books there. And one, I saw the pictures, the other I could not understand Bible, very, very, very young. And later I made a mistake when they said, Abraham knew Sarah, so who introduced them? I had no knowledge of biblical allusions and so forth. So, but thank God, I was curious, but at the same time, we were living in a province where Armenian Quarter almost was ghetto, but we took pride that we're all living together. We never had an inferiority complex or put down. We felt superior. As a matter of fact, everybody wanted to buy a house to move in our neighborhood. But also, at school where I went, there were many bullies. So, believe it or not, I'm not kidding you, I had a brass knuckle to protect myself. And also, first day of school, I went and hit the biggest bully at the school. I got beat up, but nobody tangled with me for the next couple of years. So they say, he's crazy, don't approach him. And I created that mythology that I was crazy.
Well, so the creation of mythology is something I want to talk about here. And so you're named after Saint Vartan, who is essentially the patron saint of Armenia. And he was a saintly man, he was a great man, but he was also a great military leader, so obviously you took out after him.
Well, actually, that's the mythology, because Armenians, those who know history, Armenia was the first nation to accept Christianity as a state religion, 301 AD. And at 451, Iranians wanted to reimpose Zoroastrian faith on Armenians. And then a general called, excuse me, Vartan Gregorian, led a battle with the Persians, whereby 65,000 soldiers, Armenian soldiers and cavalry, met 200,000 Iranians, including Sherman tanks of that time, elephants, and so forth. They all got defeated. And Vartan died in the campaign, in defense of freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of Christianity. That's where Vartan's name came. I have neither military nor anything, but they named Vartan because it was the easiest thing they could remember. And that's why it's not Saint Vartan, just Vartan.
Well, you're in the library world, you're Saint Vartan. Let me just explain that. But you know, part of the myth making that I wanted to talk about is Calvin Trillin mentions your grandmother, and she was a myth maker herself. You talk about her in your autobiography.
Yeah. How many of you read my autobiography? Well, quite some.
Son, daughter-in-law. No.
Okay, it's called The Road to Home. I wrote it because it was right 9/11, right after 9/11. I was away from New York. I was in Detroit. It took me 23 hours to return to New York. And I thought, my God, how many homes and residences I've had, all of them in the past, and here is my last refuge. New York is under attack. So I decided to write a book so my friends, my family, and others will know about my life history. Because I'm not one of those parents who say, at your age, I was doing this, and you have it easy, and so forth, because times are not, I could not compare Tabriz, Iran, all the way to New York and Kansas City. So the story was that my father was absentee father most of the time, working in an Iranian oil company. My mother died when I was 6.5 years old. My my uncle died in trying to visit my mother when she was ill, all the way walking 60 kilometers in cold weather and so forth. He died. I had an epileptic uncle also. The only person who took care of our family was my grandmother, who was illiterate peasant woman, did not speak well, but she had the right values. And that's one of the things, most impact she's had. Diane von Furstenberg, fashion designer, just 3-4 days ago told me the book that had more impact on her, the character, was my grandmother. Because she said, my grandmother said, your looks can be questioned, your intelligence can be questioned, your walking, dancing, everything, your habits can be questioned. There's nothing anybody cannot question, but don't allow anybody to question your integrity. Because if you cash in your integrity, you're a bankrupt person morally. You have nothing to sell anymore. And that made a great impression. I did not know what integrity meant at the time, but I knew that's important. Second thing she taught me, not to use 4-letter words. First time I used, she washed my mouth with soap. Said, your mouth has to be clean. Until today, my wife would have testified, I seldom ever lose 4-letter words, because you have to be, if you want to insult somebody, you have to use better words than 4-letter words. Such as, for example, once I described President of University of Texas's mind resembling to a lighthouse. Once in a while there is a light beam following prolonged period of darkness. And for some reason he got very upset at me. I don't know why. Then I told him, no, it's not original. It was Lloyd George describing Marshall Haig's mind, because he always charged during World War I. He had no other strategy but charge from one slaughter to another. So my grandmother has been the real myth in my life, and she told us one thing. She was illiterate, but she wanted me to go to school to learn. And that's one of the reasons I am where I am, because one of the things she insisted, that if I fight anybody, it's fair game. I can be my age. But if an old man or elderly man or young man, much older than I, beat me up to tell her. And one day, believe it or not, I threw a snowball which hit principal's eye in Tabriz, my school. It was an accident. I was beat up, and I came home. I said, a man hit me. He said, take me to show him who it is. I took him, my school, said, that's the man. And she went to him, have you fed this kid? He said, no. Have you taken care of it? How the hell you have the right to raise that? And she slapped him. So they want to expel me from school, but I was a good student. They said I'm orphan and understand and so forth. But she always taught me a lesson. Don't ever ask for trouble, be prepared, and don't blame anybody but you or the other. Don't involve other people in conflict. So I all kinds of things from her that those of you have read, you know, that formed my personality. And, but more than that was the library. Because for some reason, I was asked to shelf books in the library. But I used the occasion to read books, because going library was considered sissy by my classmates, my friends. But I said, I'm only shelving books. So I read, and I read voraciously. So I found the library being the freest most private act that it provides anybody to go. At the time now that there are 2 books published on silence and privacy. Libraries are the last stations of privacy and silence. As a matter of fact, if you take express train, Acela from New York to Washington, there's a quiet room. Imagine, quiet and privacy and silence have become rare commodities. Library provides that. And the other thing is, I could read anything. I read books I did not know. Spinoza, I did not know what he was talking about. But I knew about Three Musketeers. I knew about
The Count of
Miserables.
Monte Cristo you talk
Monte
about,
Cristo.
and Les Miserables, Hugo.
Yeah, Les Miserables. Count Monte Cristo, I was so fascinated how he's going to escape from jail. You know, which way. So,
well, for an exile, for an immigrant, those are Jean Valjean and Edmond Dantes are great role models. You know, people who escape from the island or escape
Absolutely.
from jail and recreate their lives.
And so I traveled all over the world. I visited places without paying a penny. And so now that all knowledge is available, or not knowledge, all information available, mostly people are interested in entertainment rather than expanding knowledge and not interrupted, because interruption was the most important problem. Intermittently, you change programming here and there, but the book allows you act of privacy to carry with you. You don't need to charge it. There's no electricity.
Right.
Dog runs around, you can throw at the dog. You can't throw your computer at the dog. You can read in candlelight. You can take it with you. They remain silent. They don't call you. They're like companions. So my books are arranged, the way I'd arranged it was what I read in high school, what I read as an undergraduate, what I read as graduate student, and what I read as professor. Each book that you like needs to be reread, because each of us project things into it. And each week, my late wife, before she died, for the last 2 years, almost a year and a half, read entire Trollope and entire Dickens, all the things that she had read in her youth, in order to create beginning and at the end, that she came with those knowledge and she's living with that knowledge. So it's a remarkable thing what books and libraries do for you, including, by the way, I don't know whether you have it or not, many immigrants and grandparents and so forth who could not read. They were going to the library to learn how to read and write. They said, well, I'm going to the library, I'll be back.
Right.
They did not tell why they were going to the library in order to learn how to read and write. And many people who said, I don't have my eyeglasses with me, would you read this for me? Because they were illiterate. So it's remarkable in 21st century to have illiterate people deprived of things, relying only on television. The television is a good machine and provides also learning. But there's nothing like the book. Some of you are used to it, some of you are not, but it's always going to be there. And books without library will be homeless children.
Very good.
So I'm glad you have home for all the...
We have good homes for the books, including yours here. There's one line that you have, one statement you make in the book that I love about books like Les Miserables or Count of Monte Cristo, that the protagonists of these books are lifelong companions.
Yes.
That they're people you take with them wherever you go. You take the book, you take the heroes with you.
Well, you know, one of the things Jean Valjean I liked most, because we were always taught about Christianity, and there it is, Jean Valjean stealing candlesticks, let's say from Notre Dame, and the priest says, I gave it to him so that he would not be arrested and tortured. Now, how many people will do this? And that was an act of revelation. The generosity of the priest showed the True Samaritan and so forth. And Jean Valjean became, in many ways, Christian. And it's a romantic act, nothing happens, but once in a while it's right to make us revisit our humanity, what ties us together rather than what divides us. And that was one of the things Jean Valjean did. Conte Monte Cristo about injustice. So some injustice. Uncle Tom's Cabin, I read it in Armenian. I cried, but I had no idea when I came 1956 America, there were African Americans still had signs, colored and other and so forth. Because I had taught America as the greatest nation, and I've seen the movies, World War II movies, there were no racial problems, Italians and Christians and Jews and African Americans, including Native Americans, were fighting together against Nazis. So I had that image projected, and you come and learn that life is not as simple as it projects. You have to get to know in order to not know here, but know also in your being, the biblical sense of knowing through Christianity what Christian spirit is.
So you've had a remarkable career encountering diversity of all kinds. You start in Armenia, which itself, or start in Iran, but in a part of Iran that, as you describe, Tabriz, that has been affected by the Russians. You grew up actually under Russian occupation during the Second World War. The Mongols had invaded the Arabs, the Turks, the Uzbeks, etc. And so there are remnants of all that. And that diversity, is that something you understood and carried with you? Is that something you...
Well, you know, this is a very good question. Until World War II, only Americans I had met were missionaries. And only pictures I saw during Sunday missionary schools. I'd never seen pictures. And also, something else, only piano in the church playing were missionaries. And that was related also, by the way, to Andrew Carnegie, who bought 7,200 church organs, gave to churches in order not to allow ministers to stifle the spirit of Christianity. When ministers and pastors can go on, organ starts playing, namely, enough of that. But missionaries, I'd seen missionaries, and also American hospital in my hometown. Other than that, we'd never seen Americans. There were one Englishman in town. So it was all Persians, Turks, Kurds, and Armenians, and some Assyrians, and some small Jewish community in my hometown. That was the thing. World War II changed that. We saw Soviet army, Australians came, and one incident I've never forgotten, an Australian soldier burning cigar in donkey's ear. See how donkey jumps and so forth. So because to me, they were the most civilized people that were coming. And so I learned from below about, I'd never seen a map till Soviet maps in town. They always showed when Soviets were advancing, maps were changing. When Soviets were defeating, maps never changed. And so forth. So I was very conscious of all of that.
You said about Iran, the part of Iran that you grew up in, that there were a diversity of cultures, religions and languages, different religions and languages, but that it was one civilization.
Yes.
Could you tell us what you mean by that?
Well, I've never heard of Western and Eastern civilization because when I was growing up, you had different cultures but one civilization. Civilization was called a universal phenomenon, not particularly attached to one nation or another. And that impressed me, and I tried to study that, and that led me to Ardal Toynbee and all the others, including one very fascinating thing. In 1930s, Fabian socialists in England had published a book, Soviet Russia, A New Civilization, ?
The Webbs.
Or the Webbs,
Yeah.
Eugene and Beatrice Webb. And that was one of the things I had never paid attention. I knew about Armenians that we become suffering, we're first rate, we suffered a lot, and so forth. I thought, therefore, we're part of Christian civilization. But then I noticed that there are different kinds of Christians. And then I was asking always, what unites us, what divides us, and so it gets very complicated. But what we thought, that we had something in common. And something in common was music, theater, and so forth. For example, Armenians had translated Shakespeare in Armenian. It doesn't read well. I read it Shakespeare Armenian. I just did not understand the words and so forth. Desdemona, where is my handkerchief? That's, so the words itself in Turkish, Persian don't sound good at all. And
But you say that many children were named Romeo or Juliet.
Romeo and Juliet, and Arsène Lupin was very, French detective, was very common names, and Arsène. Russians still use Arsène, but they don't know it comes from there. And then you had also Elizabeth, my sister Eugenia, because my father liked the name Eugenia. And Hamlet, Russians still use Hamlet, first name. I don't know why, right. But maybe not because of character, but just the name sounded good, Shakespeare name.
Right.
Wherever you go, and that is not just Armenians and Persians alone. It has always interested me, and maybe you have answers to this. Why is Latin America not considered part of Western civilization by people who write about civilizations? What does it take to belong to Western civilization? 5 centuries enough? All Latin American religion, Catholicism, and now Pentecostal and Protestant and so forth. Languages are French, German, English, Portuguese, and Spanish. Parties are political parties, conservative, Marxist, socialist. Architecture is ballet is Western, orchestras are Western, poetry is Western, literature is Western, but somehow they're not part of Western civilization. Even Greeks were not excluded in part of Western civilization because they're Greek Orthodox. When Germany was defeated, I had November 11th issue of San Francisco Examiner. Headline was, Huns have been defeated. Germans were considered Huns because only people could belong to good civilization
right.
were Anglo-Saxons minus Germans, Latin,
right.
so forth. So this civilizational issue is always going to be dependent because nobody has written which rules make you belong to civilization. Should Jews be excluded from Western civilization? Of course not. Should Muslims be excluded? Of course not. But nobody defines them because it's easy to have catchwords, but if you analyze what are they reading, what are they doing, and so forth, you can see so much.
Well, so talking about Western civilization and the humanities, in your education, you have this extraordinary flying carpet moment to Beirut, and then from Beirut to the College Armenian in Beirut to Stanford. All of a sudden, you're at Stanford, yeah. and you describe the education you have as an undergraduate at Stanford. I just want to read one paragraph and then ask you a question about it. This is your undergraduate education at Stanford. In addition to the Western Civ course, the famous Stanford Western Civ course, I took many lecture courses and seminars on subjects ranging from Indian civilization to Europe since 1914, the Muslim world, the Near East, the diplomatic history of the Far East, histories of Russia, the Balkans, Byzantium, the Ottoman Empire, Chinese Revolution in Latin America, from Plato's dialogues to Goethe's Faust, world literature, classical, medieval, modern, comparative studies of the French, Russian, and Chinese revolutions, ideological and literary currents in the 19th and 20th centuries, the role of the individual in personality in history, anthropology, the history of architecture, art history, and Latin. Is that possible today?
No. Now parents will say, what the hell are you doing? You need a job. Why are you filling your brain with all kinds of things? Get something useful. All right? The thing I learned, I can tell you now. I was teaching Plato's Republic, his greatest book in my book, because I learned one thing from Plato's Republic, that the body is tripartite. Head is the ruler. Chest is for passion, love, courage. Lower parts for acquisition and discharge, period. And the reason your neck is narrow in order not to allow for your body to pollute your head. Well, that was wonderful. I had no understanding, because I did not take many science courses that I would get low degree. I had no understanding of human body till 1999. I was operated on. And my poor wife had to get 3 Armenian doctors from Columbia Presbyterian to explain to me that bladder, stomach, and belly are not the same. Just because they belong to lower part and so forth. Since then, I've been reading a lot on anatomy and so forth. But I'm just saying, sometimes you have to challenge ideas in order to know what you don't know. Because one of the problems we have, we know what we know, but we don't know what we don't know until challenged. I was challenged and I knew what was missing. So that's one of the things that I wanted to tell. I took all the courses and I wrote, one thing I was cured of was psychohistory. I've written Karl Marx. Karl Marx was the ugliest man in town. He was married the most beautiful girl in town, aristocratic type. He got good wedding presents, whatever. He had lots of illnesses. He was very resentful. When his son died, he had to borrow money to bury his son. Anyway, I made a list of Karl Marx angry against capitalism. I listed all of this, and I thought I had a great work, big. My French professor gave me A+, but one line that today has bothered me, until today. Friedrich Engels was a very rich man, had none of the illnesses. He wrote the same thing. So that cured me of psychohistory, right there and then, because unless you go to the root, you don't know what you're missing and what you're doing. So the reason I had this esoteric education, ladies and gentlemen, because I was history major, but my professor said there was honors program in humanities. You take both of them, BA in history and humanities, PhD in history and humanities. So for 7 years or 6 years, I took all these courses, the things that interest me, I wanted to know exactly. And it helped me a lot to understand comparative religion. As a matter of fact, I have attended more interfaith meetings than anybody here or in the entire Kansas City. And I learned one lesson. One of the last time I summarized the meetings. Brother, we both serve the Lord. You in your way and I in his. That was the thing. Anyway, so I'm just saying, tolerance also is not enough. Because tolerance, I can tolerate you. I say you'll be insulted. Tolerance has to be based on understanding. If you don't understand, it's an empty word. The same thing, prayer. I read my prayers. Everybody says that. These are people who never pray, but it's become a real cliche. My prayers, my thoughts and prayers are with you. It's become such a cliche that I can't even say it because you have to say, keep quiet or just I feel so sorry about so. But the whole idea, people would never pray, go to church and say, you read my prayers. So why are you saying that? I learned a lot there. One last thing, Plato's Republic and Plato's other thing. When parents say, what are you studying? Educatio means drawing out of you what's already there. Educators don't put things in you, they try to draw things which already are there, to awaken somebody in a sense. That's the best education, because it's not brainwashing, it's not lecturing. It's trying to allow you to reconstruct yourself as a human being with times and within times and others.
So the question of liberal education in the contemporary age, I'm going to quote you again on this in your afterword to Democracy in America by Tocqueville, one of your favorite.
You read more than I have read.
Well, I've just read you. That's, it's an education in itself. But on the subject that we're talking about, you talk about diversity strengthens us in that it also poses problems we haven't resolved. But with the emphasis in more recent years on maintaining separate and specific cultural, ethnic, religious, and regional identities, there is a question about how we still remain e pluribus unum, from one many. Yeah. And to me, there's also the question of a liberal education of the kind that you describe in that paragraph about the courses you took, which opens you to the world, which takes things out of you and embraces the world, doesn't tolerate the other in the world, but actually embraces the world. And what's the way out? And is the library one of the ways out for us in this dilemma?
Well, I tell you, it's a very good question. I don't have full answer for that, but I'll try. I think one of the things that fascinates me that America is an idea, not just an institution. This is the only nation on earth that you marry the Constitution. If you read George Washington's address in Toro Synagogue, welcoming Jews in Rhode Island against religious persecution, it's the Constitution that is uniting all of us. Sure, there's history, World War, liberation wars, democracy. But the whole idea that the Constitution is what we all adhere to, above religion, above everything else, because Constitution that protects religious freedom, individual rights, and others. And as America changes, so do amendments that emerge and so forth. There's no other country in the world, one, you join religion, like religious wars. One, you join a system for economic thing alone. But America is just that, an idea. The reason the Tocqueville generation sent Statue of Liberty to the United States in the 1870s was they were worried in Europe that the only democracy that there is may be in danger after Civil War to disappear. Because the idea of democracy all over the world used America. Even Ho Chi Minh, in his early stages, George Washington was one of his heroes, America. We forget that. Many people considered America revolution as not destructive, but as constructive revolution that people could emulate. And therefore, how to belong with respecting diversity. Well, is the contract with America. And I became, as a student, I became citizen late because I always used to teach my students that you have to go vote. And then I realized that what I'm preaching, I'm not doing it, so I became citizen. And the moment I became citizen, it was very moving. Out of many, one, I felt I was like Charlie Chaplin, who had lived with the same woman for years. They had children without marrying it. So I felt it was a marriage ceremony when I became citizen. I was so moved. I was saying, you should abandon all loyalty to others. I never believed dual citizenship, for example, only one, and that you belong to, and you have two rights. But with citizenship also comes obligations. And now I think more emphasis is placed on the rights rather than on also rights, obligations. Because there's so many obligations to preserve, to enhance, and to perform. And there's no other country like this where I'm not talking regime, communism was one other thing, but that ended the moment communists, people who criticized President Ford about Eastern Europe The fact was Soviet Union, by creating also 3 additional membership in United Nations, Ukraine and Belarus, and Yugoslavia being communist but not being part of Soviet Union. Biggest thing happened in 1949 when China did not join Soviet Union. So it's a working class is also ethnic and all kinds of other divisions. So the idea of party was not the one that we adhere to. The idea of constitution was the one. That's one of the things that the pluribus unum always will be a challenge. You come, you become, you're not born American, you become an American. And that's very hard to explain for those of us who came, because converts are far more fanatic in many ways than natives, in both sides of the scale.
We do citizenship ceremonies, naturalization ceremonies in the library, and it's one of the most moving things,
Yes.
and in part because you do have people from 70 or 80 countries we'll have in one room who all express their obligation, not the rights, sense of
Rights
obligation
and obligations.
to the country, and there's not a
Well,
not a
one
dry
of the
eye.
things I did also at Kennedy School, citizenship in Boston, and I reminded people there was a party of know-nothings in 1830s who thought Jews were bad, Italians were bad, Irish were bad, Catholics definitely, and others know nothing. And a century later, almost, we have a Catholic, John F. Kennedy, first Catholic president. So we overcome, these movements come and go, but it's always rebuilt, become, and re-examine, and reconfigure and assert as an American nation.
You have said, and you quote Andrew Carnegie, appropriate both for your job at the New York Public Library and now at the Carnegie Corporation, saying that libraries are the cradle of democracy.
Yes.
And talk a little bit about going to the New York Public Library, which was in very sad shape. Bryant Park was the home of the homeless in America, and there are stories about people, scholars and the library and bringing their own light bulbs so they could see the books. And you arrive in that kind of situation, and how did you turn it around, and how?
You know, when I first arrived in New York, August 6th, 1956, as freshman, I had never seen so much power, so much light, so much force as New York. For some reason, I went into the library, and then I tiptoed out of it. I thought I had entered it illegally, because nobody asked me for a card and so forth. I remember Slavic division gradually retreating, because somebody would ask, where is your card that came, so forth. I just did not know. Library raised one issue, this also, we talked, I guess. There has become a pernicious feeling that excellence belongs only to the private domain. The public utility, public this, so forth, is not to be excellent. We challenged that in New York. We challenged it that 19th century people built libraries as a tribute to democracy. They had to be beautiful, forceful, efficient, clean, and so forth, so on. They also built banks for power and so forth of a democracy. But one thing people forget, they also post office. The New York Post Office is one of the great post office. Post office also was a monument tribute to democracy. But gradually, as we become more utilitarian, we think public sector can survive, but not excel. We challenged that at the New York Public Library, and we succeeded. The only criticism, one criticism, was leveled during my entire tenure. It was read by Village Voice. We had ornamental fixtures in the bathrooms that were shining lamps were shining, everything was shining. They say too luxurious. And you know who came to my defense? Howard Fast, communist writer. He said, shut up, you guys. If you don't have an idea what to do, you have an idea, say. If you don't, just keep quiet. These guys are trying their best to restore. And then the second thing that happened, which is important for the libraries, was we put writers as important as actors, performers, and entertainers. So having library Literary Lions dinner was an innovation. There are 21 writers, 21 publishers, having 210 guests, each one paying $10,000 to be enjoying an evening with a favorite writer with their books and so on. And then everybody starts giving money to the library. We'll provide the wine, we'll provide this, and so on. So Norman Mailer accused me of making writers celebrities. And I'm glad we did it. Why not? Why should we people are enhancing our minds, extending our imagination, taking us through back and forth, should not be as good as a wrestler or as a comedian and others being celebrity.
Amen. And also a little hypocritical of Norman Mailer to talk about celebrity like that.
I know. He was famous already.
And I want you to know what one of my little bits of trivia about the New York Public Library is that I once sat at a table with Norman Mailer in the reading room.
Yeah.
And he was not being a celebrity that day. But there is this, what Vartan is talking about is there's this great picture of the 21 writers, the literary lions at this dinner, and I won't read all the names, but maybe just a few. James Baldwin was there, Chaim Potok, Philip Roth, Ved Maida, Elizabeth Hardwick, Ann Beatty, Herman Woe, Peter Matheson, George Plimpton, Francis Fitzgerald, William Manchester, Elie Wiesel, John Kenneth Galbraith, Susan Sontag, Arthur Miller, et cetera,
et cetera, et cetera,
et cetera. And of course, that's what you did is you made the library the intellectual center, and the intellectual center for everybody. It was a democratic institution.
Democratic institution, and the only thing I asked the library wanted to name things after me. I said, no, there's a small plaque, and there, democracy and excellence are not mutually exclusive. That's the belief I have. I had it, I have it, I'll always will have it.
And the library is a place of self-improvement, and has always been a place of self-improvement where the individual, you talk a lot about individualism. David Reisman was an important friend and mentor of yours who wrote The Lonely Crowd, but you I think, set that off against Tocqueville's notion of the individualism of Americans, which is always expressed in our associational capabilities too.
That's an important notion. Individualism is not separate from community. The Tocqueville's individualism include, the word individualism, in my at least knowledge, was created to describe American character. There was no such word as individualism. The Tocqueville coined it to individualism, because he'd never seen a society in which people could rein their personal ambitions and their personal gratification without trying to enhance others also. In a sense, the generous act is attached to individualism, not separating, not egoist, but individually generous American who delays his gratification in order to help society also. That was a new notion, European aristocrats. It was not lèse-majesté that you give because you're an aristocrat and so forth. On the contrary, you were part of a community in which liberty, individualism were united, but individualism was not glorification of self. It was a participation in the community. That's what impressed Alexis de Tocqueville about America. The book, by the way, still is a classic, de Tocqueville's America, even though it read with some of few only states he visited. So that was what I was trying to mention about de Tocqueville. Individualism does not mean isolationism. Individualism does not mean transcendence. Individualism is generous member of an order, in which you retain your identity without losing it, but at the same time you participate in society's welfare. That was his notion, what made America great.
So in a minute, we're going to bring Vahe up and have a little bit more conversation. It'll be a family conversation. But I want to ask you another question about libraries and about books, and I'm going to use a statement of yours and ask you to talk about it for a second. You have this great line in your book about the importance of books is books are a sharing. The author is sharing himself or herself with you as when we absorb a book, assimilate a book, then we share that book, share who we are with the book and through the book. And as a library, we're constantly sharing ourselves through sharing the sharing of books. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, all of you are in the library now. Each one of you has read at least one book that made a great impression on you. Because again, you share the knowledge. Some cities have, like Chicago, entire city would read one book, so you could have common vocabulary. But those of you who have read Shakespeare, you have common vocabulary. Those who have read Chaucer, maybe not. But those of you who read Tolstoy have common vocabulary. Those of you who read James Baldwin, maybe you have common vocabulary. It deals with three issues, existential issues. One is, and I described this, I don't know whether I wrote it or not, Einstein and Max, his colleague, had correspondence. Einstein said, scientists ask why. Why? Why do we have it? Why? Philosophers ask to what end? All right? What are we doing on this journey? Why are we here on Earth? What's the meaning of life? Are we just, I saw on the wall the Providence, consume and die? Are we consumer entertainment units, consumer units, socio-economic units to be processed? If there is no hot dog, we'll provide a hamburger and so forth. Our entire preoccupation is our eating and so forth. Or we also have spiritual yearning. We're depressed sometimes, we're in love, we're betrayed, we believe in afterlife, some people don't. We're spiritual, rational beings, rather than mere socioeconomic units to be rearranged. If that's the thing, and St. Augustine also writes the city of God. So Rome was a very well-run city, congratulations, but where was it going? What was it saying? And that's the question we never ask, seldom ask, because it's very troubling. Also, entire life, you have one job or various jobs, various professions. Are we just here to work, consume, and die? Or we're here also to yearn impossible. We go to a theater, we go to a library, we become part of a many. And that's one of the things, I guess, is very important, libraries. There are social laboratories, also gathering places. My favorite room at the New York Public Library, when I got depressed, and believe me, once in a while I did, was the reading room, 800 people working. And then if I wanted to have fun, I went Jewish division, where it's the only place all different ideologies of Jews, Hasidic Jews, Trotskyite Jews, all of them pretending they don't see who's next to them. Sitting like that, sitting like this. I enjoyed very much, you know. I said, we're in an ecumenical place, anybody can come. And the thing is, the library, and I'll stop at that, the library had also one thing, which is going gradually through social media. It's the best place that protected your privacy. Nobody had the right to know what books you read, how many books you read, who you are. They got their social security number, your income, so forth. And library is the only place that nobody graduates from, which is also good. because nobody can graduate from a library.
It's lifelong learning.
Lifelong learning. But you have to know what you're missing in order to learn. And that's one of the things that is very important, introspection. Library allows introspection. Believe it or not, people are not used to silence. They always turn the radio, something. But try to spend 1 hour without any activity. It's such a revealing thing. Scary also, because you start asking questions about yourself that you never asked. Anyway, so I'd like to congratulate you for this magnificent building and your citizens who are keeping this alive. But what you did is to bring more children and others. We have children's libraries, and if you have civic leaders, you should encourage them to have here children's library, because, what should I say? I mean, early childhood is great, but children have to have come together somewhere. This should be safest place for parents to bring their children, to light up their imagination early. They don't have to go to college in order to find that there are many important questions about afterlife, about now, about love, about trial, and so forth. And so anyway, I'd like to congratulate that you have a magnificent library, great leadership, all of you, and especially librarians. Librarians are foot soldiers of our civilization. That's what we're called. No, foot soldiers.
Well, if we're the foot soldiers, you're our captain.
No, sergeant maybe, but not captain.
You are our captain. So now I'd like to bring Vartan Gregorian up. Vahe, if you would come up here. And of course, most of you know that he is a sports writer for the Star. He spent 25 years in St. Louis. He's a little slow in finding out where civilization is in Missouri. And he has recently won the AP Sports Writer of the Year award. And he said about himself that he may be the black sheep of the family, though he does have a sister-in-law who's Donald Trump's favorite White House correspondent, so there may be other black sheep, who knows, in the family. Graduated from the University of Pennsylvania after his father left him there alone, having been provost at Penn and then gone to New York to NYPL. So I have a question, and Vartan, if he's the black sheep for being a sports writer, are we eliminating sports writing as a liberal art, or in fact, isn't he really essentially the Cervantes of the sports world, because the Kansas City Royals are kind of the Don Quixote of the sports world? So that's my question for you.
That's for you.
Yeah. Let me mention that I have 3 sons. To tell them what to do is to assure that they will not do it. All right? So you have to have reversal. I took our 2 children in Texas or somewhere in a baseball game. I'm not a great expert on baseball. So they said, there goes shortstop Larry Bowa. I said, where's the long stop? And they said, please don't talk. You're humiliating us with your ignorance. So what happens? He went to a field in which I know nothing. My second son did not want him to play with toy guns even. He went with the military. He's a military historian. He's in the State Department, in charge of counterinsurgency or whatever other activities. How come you went to military field? You forbade me to work with guns, toy guns. We would send him his room for punishment. He would paint soldiers, little soldiers, and sell it and so on. And Vahe always has done what he wanted to do. And one of the things his love was about sports. He was in the football team of University of Pennsylvania, and I left him. My children I've never ordered our children, or could I be ordered children, and my late wife also had 3 rules. Get your education, You want to go additional education, we'll take care of you. Once you stop, you have to take a job. Job means you have to be good at it and you must like it. It must be what was the last one? It must be, let me see. It must be ethical and legal. You cannot just say legal and say because it's legal, it's ethical, which is what people talk about. And he's done all those. And he is loyal to his teams, but also he sees in his teams individuals. Not teams are not entities, anonymous entities, but they're individuals. He's felt their suffering, their individuality, their parental abandoning them, and so forth, all of this. He cares because he was raised as a sensitive boy, and he's now a sensitive man. So that's where it is. And I'm very proud of him for being a sports writer. He's not black sheep of the family.
Excellent.
I just chime in and add, can you see why maybe I didn't go into academia? It may have been a little bit of a shadow. So I think we were really encouraged to gravitate to find our own way and find the things that resonated with us and mattered to us and the very things he described. And I think when we went to Texas, part of our journey as a family was at the University of Texas. I was a pretty impressionable age, about 8, 9, 10, and football was a big deal there, and I got into football. And my dad at one point questioned the University of Texas's legendary coach, Darrell Royal, about why so much money was being spent on football in Austin. And this resulted in my dad being invited to have a day with the football team and sort of see what all their programs are, which in turn led to Coach Royal coming to the house for a faculty party once, and me being outside throwing the ball around, just making sure I got discovered. And he was nice enough to kind of pat me on the head, and that was about it. But it's a very fond memory of our childhood, and it really was a time of an important time in how we came to see possibilities of the things we'd get interested in.
And by at one point you're a student at Penn when your father was the provost of Penn, and it's a very controversial moment too. That must have affected your life in a significant way.
Well,
were you happy to see him go?
It was so good to get rid of him. No, to the contrary, of course. This was a really interesting time in our life, and I think also this was a very pivotal time in my father's life. As you can tell from his story is an impossible story. His story is an impossible, every aspect of it is amazing. And the arc in general always seemed to be upward, though, at a certain point, until this sort of hiccup time at Penn where he was passed over, and rather cruelly passed over for the presidency, which led to this entire life that we're talking about now, really, in a lot of ways. It's a great lesson in how those things happen. And I tell people all the time, I didn't know he was a big deal until Mad Magazine came out with its spoof of Ghostbusters. And he was working at the public library at the time. And this is a true story. It's not in the movie, but in the second panel of the Mad Magazine Ghostbusters spoof, it's a caricature of him with Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray, and then we realized how diabolical these Mad Magazine people are that they'd insert him in there. So he sees this as a fundraising opportunity and sends a letter to, I can't remember the Mad Magazine publisher's name. Blair, do you know it? Maybe. And he sends a letter, says he was gratified to be featured in Mad. He'd like a few copies of the magazine, and would you mind, pitching in for the library? And tell me if I'm wrong, but he gets a letter back with maybe 10 copies of the magazine, and it says, thanks for your letter. As for the donation, we're a cheap outfit.
Yeah. The last part is correct, but first part, because we had the entire collection of Mad Magazine, we're missing 3 issues. So I said not send some issues, send special 3 issues. And he sent back, here are the 3 missing issues. As far as being conservator of library, being $1,000 a year, we're cheap outfit. You're correct, actually.
Let me chime in with one other quick thing, too, which is I believe one of my father's favorite movies is The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. And his life sort of reflects that, these dreams come true. My Walter Mitty moment never happened, which was when I went to Penn and fancied myself a pretty good football player who was going to really have a great career, and turned out I wasn't that fast. And the coach told me he'd love to play me, except I was not big enough for my size and not fast enough for my, no, not big enough for my speed and not fast enough for my size. That kind of ruled me out. But my dream was that my dad as an administrator there and me playing football, we were going to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated. I don't think I've ever said this out loud before, except for maybe to my friend Blair. And that I'd be in my uniform with my elbow on his shoulder and would say, the provost and the pass receiver. But it didn't work out.
You never told me about that.
Yeah, I didn't dare to say it out loud.
But I'll tell you one other thing about him. We want a summer job for him, something. And I told the vice president for grounds and so forth, can you find some summer, like all the professors' children. And they made him a strip sweeper. And one day I came, I was so furious, but he liked it.
It was good, honest work. And I will say this, my youngest brother,
Outdoor work.
by the time things had changed in our family, when he got his first job that my dad helped him with, he was a maitre d' at Tavern on the Green. So,
Oh, darn.
a cushy life for him.
We're bitter, aren't we? Yeah, we're bitter. We're bitter. Well, Vi, thanks for coming up here. We're going to go to a few questions and answers in 1 second, but we wanted to give Vartan Gregorian an honorarium for doing this, but he refused to accept the honorarium. But he has agreed to take the honorarium and pass it along to the Kansas City Friends of the Public Library, the Friends of the Kansas City Public Library. So if you would, so Matt Sterling is our president of the Friends. Thank you very much.
Congratulations. You have to help him more.
And if I can just say real quick, one, as a public sector employee and a fellow history major, thank you for the work that you've done with your life to support our pillars of democracy. And on behalf of the board, that we have a few board members here, the Friends, we are humbled and honored to accept this. Thank you so much. And I would just say to everybody else, be like Vartan. Support your public library. Support this building. If you want to be a friend, come talk to any of us. Look at the billboards that talk about how to be a friend. Be involved. This is your institution. Help support it. Thank you all, and thank you so much.
And so now we'll take a few questions. So I do want to apologize to Vi because our original plan was that you'd get the check, but sorry. Anyway, so questions?
Yes, sir. Thank you for your good work. The young lady in New York, AOC, that's what they call her, she got elected on, social media, and she's now saying, I'm quitting it. I'm getting off of Facebook and all that. And that segues into my question. If you're going to fight to save a library, on some level you have to embrace technology. On other levels you have to kind of fight against it. Where do you draw that line?
Okay. Technology is very important, and library always has to renew itself in order to be relevant. There's no possibility to ignore technology. As a matter of fact, but at the same time, people should know 40% of New Yorkers do not have internet connection. So library provides them now portable tablets to read electronically or to communicate, and so they read. We also lend people movies, even video and others, because we cannot have disjointedness in our culture. Those participate, those not. And that's very important. Also, because of technology, internet, for the first time in history, of mankind. Each of you here have your own Library of Alexandria. What pharaohs used to have, now each individual, thanks to technology and libraries, has complete access to entire knowledge. But then comes the issue. You still have to read it. You still have, how you read it doesn't matter. You still have to participate. So I'm happy that my successors at the New York Public Library have digitized it, so it's available, and have also helped libraries to have equipment and so forth to rent, to give, but no charge, all for free. And that's why I'm happy about it.
I would just say Rome knew how to run a city, but they didn't know where they were going. So you can use technology, but you, if you don't,
Technology, yes,
but you
technology.
got to know where you're going with it.
Technology is a means, not an end.
Exactly.
Right. Vartan, you used the phrase digital divide in your 2002
Yes.
speech. That must have been one of the earlier versions of that phrase, which is something that we live with every day, taking technology to people who can't afford it. And crossing the digital divide. But I do have a question for Vahe, because the digital technology has been a boon in many ways for readers, but it's not been a boon for the newspaper. It's helped, it's been a curse, if anything, to the newspaper reader.
Well, it's made it complicated in some ways because the formula is totally different, and there are certain people in this room that could speak to it better than I could. But I will say this, we are read actually more than ever, more places than ever. Well, this is a minor example, but it's a telling example. I mean, it's not uncommon for somebody doing some of our Chiefs coverage or Royals coverage to hear from somebody on the other side of the world. There's something really powerful in that. It is a transitional time trying to figure out exactly how this is going to ultimately play out, but we can see all over the world, we can see in Kansas City, we can see in journalism everywhere that there's a hunger for the knowledge, and it's a little bit as my father laid out. I mean, it's not technology in itself, it's as a means to an end, and getting it right and refining it every day, and I think that's what we're doing. It is weird that it's been, a decade or more that we've all had this feeling of flux, but we know it's heading to something that will still be substantial and meaningful.
You also have ProPublica. They got just Pulitzer Prize. Quality of journalism counts because content is king now. Everybody's fighting for content. And the newspapers, I don't want to criticize them, newspapers insist that 10 years ago each one had to annual 20% profit. No organization makes that kind of profit. And now many of them have stripped them. I told somebody, it reminded me of the proverbial donkey. The owner decided not to feed the donkey. One day nothing happened, second day nothing happened, third day nothing happened. At the end of 2 weeks, it died, the donkey died. So what happens, I trained him how to live without eating. By the time he learned, he died. So newspapers are like that. Wall Street Journal is thriving, New York Times is thriving, Washington Post is thriving. Los Angeles Times was bought by someone, I think scientists, is gradually thriving. What people are missing is community news, local news, which is not being provided. New York Times does not cover New Jersey anymore, for example. And that's the terrible thing that's happening. So I think if somebody is for profit there, they're not going to succeed because social media can advertise better than you.
And do you think libraries can play a role in the future of
libraries should be, I'm not suggesting this, I'm just speaking loud. Libraries should be laboratories for newspapers. When I was president of New York Public Library, the brother-in-law of my chairman was publisher of the New York Times. So Punch Sulzberger asked me, we had lunch for the owner, publisher's luncheon. He asked me, what are businesses doing for New York Public Library? I said, let's ask yours, New York Times. You can have all our microfilm readers from the library. We'll pay you $10,000 back. You've unloaded all those machines to libraries. You're not contributing a penny to the libraries. And we're serving New York Times' archive at the New York Public Library. 100 microfilm readers. Everybody comes to read. The New York Times stopped that at the time. So this should be a laboratory for these people, especially with technology. We had at the library before internet, you could call New York Public Library for any question, they answered you in 3 minutes. Before Amazon, library already practiced Amazon, shipping books back and forth. So the only time library has censored me, when I annual meeting, I said, how come you did not come up with the idea of Amazon or Google and so forth? You've been doing all your lives. Why are you always kind of adapting things rather than inventing things? But that's library profession. They're there to serve. They're not in the, but newspapers are there to create more creative time. Anyway, I don't want to go into that because I've spoken too much already. So.
No, never enough. So it looks like there are no more questions. So I would invite all of you to say thank you to Vartan Gregorian, a hero of civilization.
Thank you.
And Bahi.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And please take home these rules to your children.